everyone. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Dev Dialogues. Today we're speaking to Anders. He is a brilliant developer. He is behind SKALD Against the Black Priory. It is a dark fantasy RPG, and I think you guys are really going to love this conversation. So please enjoy. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's been a busy day, but it's a busy but productive, which is always kind of the state you want to be in at this point in development, I guess.
What kind of thought process did you go through to help teach the player what they could do?
I think there's actually quite a bit of planning that went into the first 5 minutes of the game. From when you start, after creating your character and you start the game, there is actually quite a bit of thought that goes into it, because there is there are a few sort of tooltip pop-ups, but ideally I would like the player to discover at least the very, very core concepts that you might not be familiar with if you're not very enfranchised with role-playing games, like the way the inventory system works and the way you have to equip stuff. That's things that I kind of placed in front of the player. There's no big spoiler, but you start the game in a locked room, and to get out of that locked room you have to go to a chest, open the chest, loot the chest, and equip what you find in the chest, because you use the dagger you find in the chest to sort of jimmy the lock open, which is a very sort of explicit design choice, because it's critically important that people realize that looting stuff, equipping stuff, and then sort of interacting with objects in the world, that's something you have to do. And there's also when you start the game, you're kind of in the corner of a room, and this is a very minor thing, but also to get out of that corner you have to move left, and then if you move left, if you don't have square perfect control where you move left 3 squares and then down, you'll often bump into the first object, which is like a desk, which will cause that object to kind of light up and like a pop-up box of text as you examine it, which is also very intentional, because a non-zero amount of players will accidentally bump into the desk and trigger the object, and that way you learn that, okay, walking into objects trigger them, and then you're kind of drawn to the door in a lot of cases, and then you understand you have to examine the door, but then you realize you can't get out without equipping a weapon, so you start looking for a chest. So there is actually a lot of thought that goes into the first couple of minutes of the game, and then immediately you run into a combat encounter, which is also obviously intentional, because it's like a textless tutorial in a sense, and on just immediately following that there is a small section where you can sort of there is a branching thing where you can choose to use stealth to sneak past an encounter if you want to. There's quite a bit of chests and doors that you can kind of lockpick or smash open. So we try to show off a lot of sort of the core action verbs for the game, for the exploration of the game within the first area. So there is a lot of intentionality about that, and there's also a lot of the way the line of sight works in the game. I took a lot of care that when you start in the first room and you walk to the door and you realize you need to equip something, from where you're standing at the door you will have spotted the chest already, so a lot of players will immediately know where to go. There's a lot of that going on as well, using kind of line of sight. And so but the thing is that kind of hyper intentionality is very energy consuming, and I want to use it more often in the game, because I think it's one of the things that I do well when I have time for it. But a lot of time you can't do it all the time everywhere, but I try to do in the more kind of set piece designed and areas, if you understand what I mean by that, the areas where there's some, there is something we want to convey in this area. This is almost it's not a cutscene, but it's the level below an interactive cutscene in a sense. We have something explicit we want to convey in this area, and in those cases there's a lot of using lines of sight, using kind of the layout to control the flow of how players progress through areas, and how they interact with elements along the way. There's a lot of very interesting kind of tools you have as a game designer and as a level designer in your toolbox to do that. So I think there is a lot of intentionality that goes into that design that players don't even realize is there, which is exactly the way you want it.
So when you are kind of designing the first area there when you're on the boat, is there a time and a place for text tutorials versus the way you did it?
I think if you can sort of eschew text tutorials, it's always better to drop the text tutorials. But in some cases, it's not really possible. And like we do have some sort of like fourth wall breaking pop-ups, for instance, in the stealth section, because like you have to explicitly tell the player this is the button to activate the stealth
Yeah.
mode. There is no way we could do it from within the game, and obviously we could have an area. So the alternative would be to be to have an area where you can only complete the area by sneaking through, and then the players would have to like through trial and error learn how to activate stealth mode. But that's
Yeah.
like
Yeah, it's kind
that
of
would be
hard
helpful.
because you a good way would be like maybe you have like a random, NPC that you can just do away with. You watch him try and walk across an area without crouching and he dies by like a trap or something like that, right? Like someone spots him,
Yeah,
shoots
sure.
him, and then you make your but like you can't explicitly tell them how to crouch without breaking that fourth wall, which you
No,
need to be able to
exactly.
do. Like it's not like
Exactly.
it's not like you can grab a piece of paper and it's like, thou shall press C or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
on it
yeah,
to
yeah,
crack.
yeah.
Like
Sure.
it's gonna break the fourth wall. And yeah,
Exactly.
and I know what you mean about like the specific set pieces, like your points of interest or your storytelling areas, where you're
Mm.
trying to convey that kind of whatever. Like if you're trying to convey a story for like, you know, you walk in a house and you see all these deliberately placed things, whether it be like, alcohol that's tipped over and like maybe a fire that kind of went out and there's like maybe a guy wrote a note, you see a skeleton with like a bottle, an empty vial,
Yeah,
like
yeah, sure.
you can kind
Exactly.
of story build that point and be like, okay, so this guy got like
Yeah,
drunk and all this stuff. So
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like, I think the beauty of environmental storytelling is that it's not particularly loud. So some players might miss it, but some people also kind of discover it
mhm.
organically. And I think like the reward for realizing that, oh wow, like for instance, like there is a in the villa area, there is a cellar underneath the villa, underneath the kitchen, and there's like a table there with
Mhm.
lots of bottles and stuff on it. And like sort of the head canon is that like the kitchen staff is kind of sneaking into the wine cellar away from their boss,
Yeah.
kind of like they have their own little like hangout area, secret area where they drink wine. And like I immensely enjoy crafting those little details in the game. And sadly, it's one of those things where like having to rush things because you have to, or not rush, but having to like, if you have a lot to do, it's very time consuming to do those things. So
Mhm.
but it's something I do enjoy. And so even in areas where we don't have time to put it in as much as I would like to, it's probably one of those things where like we'll spend time post launch adding stuff like that to the game, because I think it adds so much soul to the game.
Yeah, it is really. It's because when I come across those things, they're just very rewarding to kind of
Yeah,
see. Because
exactly.
you walk into them and you see a little like you start to notice things are kind of deliberately placed,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
you kind of write this story. And when when a level designer is able to convey a story without like literally any words or anything but just placed objects, it's very rewarding
yeah,
to recognize it.
yeah.
And but it's kind of unfortunate at the same time. It's like the level designer deliberately does this, but doesn't really receive the satisfaction of a player seeing it unless they like watch a YouTube video of a player like discovering it or something.
No, but I don't think it's. I think the beauty of it is that it doesn't have to be seen by everyone, because it kind of contributes to, like, the sort of the meta discussion of the game.
Mm.
There is a lot of sort of like group learning going on with this. Just think about how many videos there are on YouTube about people discussing the Bethesda games like Skyrim and stuff like that, where it's like,
Mm.
or the Fallout, like the Bethesda Fallout games or the Bethesda Elder Scroll games, where it's like, oh, have you noticed this detail, and like look in this house, and there's, because Bethesda is, you can say a lot of things about them, but they're really good at sort of doing environmental storytelling through using sort of the object assets in the game, like exactly that kind of thing where there will be a skeleton
Yeah.
clutching a Nuka-Cola button, or like,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, there's always something like that going on. And so, but I think what's important in a game from like a designer perspective is that the way you use environmental storytelling in your level design is kind of part of an ongoing conversation where it's important to establish early in the game that we will be leaving clues in the environment, so you as a player can feel assured that when you see things that look out of place in the environment, there's probably something going on. Because because if you do that, but part of the time it doesn't mean anything, then the players won't really be able to trust themselves. Like, okay, there's like there are footprints leading in this direction, but that can just be clutter or it can be intentional. And I think that you kind of have to be pretty sort of like disciplined as a designer to make sure that when you do put stuff like that in the environment, even if it's a small payoff, it should probably mean something, because otherwise you're kind of breaking that contract with the player. It's the same thing that when you use secret areas in games, if it's like you have a wall or like a corridor, and then one tile in that wall which is completely arbitrary and camouflage is like a secret door. That's pretty poor design, because what that says to players is that secret doors can be anywhere. So you have no way of knowing. You just have to bump into every wall. Whereas the contrary would be like, as you pass the area, there is a pop-up box saying like there is a draft on your neck, or like maybe there is like a footprint on the floor leading to that tile. So that like whenever people find secret areas, they always feel assured that okay, there was actually a way I could have known this was here, and then that makes it all the more rewarding to kind of like to have that sort of dialogue with the game. I like to think about it as like a dialogue you as the designer are having with your player. You're kind of reassuring them that if you see something out of place, there's probably a reason for it, and you will probably be rewarded in some way if you kind of pursue it.
Where would you put the classic treasure chest behind the waterfall as far as that type of thing? Is that because that's like one of those unspoken contracts that's like all video games, you're almost disappointed when there isn't a treasure chest behind a waterfall.
Oh, I think that's completely fine, because like you don't need a clue necessarily, because the treasure behind the waterfall is a trope. So obviously there should be a treasure behind it. The problem becomes if there's a lot of waterfalls in your games and none of them have treasures behind them, and then suddenly one of them has, then that's a little bit unfair. Then you should probably prompt it somehow. There should be some kind, like a corpse with a journal on him talking about the treasure behind the waterfall, so that you know to check the waterfalls, or like so there's a lot of stuff like that going on. And I think just like you have to do a lot of reflecting on these things and think about like how would players think about it. Okay, what if there's lots of waterfalls and there's a treasure behind the first of them, so that the first waterfall you meet in the game also has a treasure, but then there are 10 other waterfalls, but none of them have treasures. What does that say to the player? It means that they will go bumping into every waterfall in the rest of the game. Is that a good thing, or is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing if there is a treasure behind the first waterfall and the fourth waterfall, but not the others, so that they are occasionally rewarded? Or what if there is a treasure behind the 10th waterfall, but none of the others, so that you will not know to bump into the waterfalls, but then like somehow magically on the last stage of the game you should know to bump into the waterfall. Like there is a lot of that kind of reflexivity going on, thinking about how would players be thinking about
you can get really in depth with that. And I would think if you had a whole bunch of waterfalls, you should almost completely like not even involve treasure in your waterfalls, unless you did that thing where you said like there's a skeleton with a journal, and maybe in one of the later stages or something, because I don't know if you would want to put it in the first one and then want the player to hit every single waterfall along the way. Like I would put it like later in the game maybe.
Because the question you are kind of like what you are saying by putting treasure behind the waterfall is potentially there are treasures behind waterfalls. Sort of end of statement, and that's different compared to like having, like as you said, having a note pointing you to a waterfall, which is basically saying that there are waterfalls in the game. Behind one of them, there is a treasure, which is completely different.
Yeah, like if there's a specific map pointing to this location, completely different.
Exactly. Or knowing that there is only one waterfall with a treasure behind it, so that when you find the treasure, you know that there are no more treasures behind these waterfalls. You found the treasure now. Like, so there's a lot of that going on constantly, especially, and I think especially like in, I don't know, like, I think that kind of sort of good level design stuff is maybe, or not good level design stuff, but that kind of like reflexivity is very prevalent, I think, in role-playing game design, because role-playing games are so interactive. Like, you can interact with the environment in so many ways. So like this is a constant sort of inner monologue I'm having with myself, and it's also hugely rewarding and fun to think about, I think, but it keeps me up at night.
Well, one of the things I never really understood, because they're completely different genres, but I look back at old platformers and it's like, how would the player ever know there is a secret door off screen where they normally die? Like, like my perfect example I'm going to is like Donkey Kong Country. You could jump off, like if you go off screen, you'll land in like a barrel, but you can't see it. Like exactly. if my camera was the bottom of the level, you would just go underneath it and you wouldn't see it. So
yeah,
I don't know I don't know if that's just, maybe you discover that by failing. Like if you're about to jump to a ledge and you don't get far enough and you fall and you die, and since you died in that specific spot, you now know. Like, is there such thing as secrets that are meant to be so secret that, only certain people find it and there's no hints at all?
Absolutely, and I think that was sort of an explicit part of the game design for a lot of, especially like the NES era of games. Were kind of famous for this, like the first Nintendo system, and I think the reason for this, like from an historical context, is that first of all, Nintendo wanted to first sell you the game and then sell you their magazines with the solutions to the game, like the Nintendo Power magazine,
yeah.
which is a business strategy, good or bad. It is a business strategy. But another thing, and the thing that I remember very clearly about Nintendo, is also that Nintendo was leaning very hard into making their games conversational, because like statistically there will be this one kid in school that does exactly what you said, that they bump into that one block, or they fall into the one pit where you always die when falling into other pits, but then there's one pit you can fall into, and then there's a secret level, and then like there is this whole thing where you would gather around in playgrounds, because this was before internet, obviously, and like, did you know on this level, if you do exactly this, then that happens, which was an intentional design decision. But I think the issue is in some games that did this fairly unsuccessfully, and the famous example is Castlevania 2, which has a lot of sort of like this moon logic puzzles, which there are no way of knowing how you're going to progress. And the issue is that if you gate game progress behind that kind of moon logic, then I think it becomes very unfair. But if it's one of those things where you can complete the game just by using logic and sort of like without any external input, I think it's good enough game design if that's what you're going for. And then occasionally people will have like, oh wow, there's a way to bypass this level, or there is a secret level here, and which is hugely rewarding for them to find. I remember finding those things myself when I was younger, and like really enjoying it, but only if the game was possible to play without like having to buy the Nintendo magazine stuff.
I remember we spoke about that before with like those kind of secrets and stuff aren't really a thing anymore, since the internet, everyone can share information and you can data mine games and stuff like that. You really don't have that mystery anymore. Is that the same thing, like why cheat codes don't really exist in games anymore? Just because cheat codes used to be, like you said, almost a conversational thing that sold strategy guides and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. But at the same time, I think like cheat codes exist in games much more than we think, because so many games have console commands available to them. Like SKALD has that, and so many other games have it, and those are basically the same as cheat codes, and they even serve the same purpose, where a lot of cheat codes were originally put in games to allow testers to, for instance, play a level of Doom without having to think about dying, for instance, and obviously that's why I have console commands exposed to the player in SKALD, but also I hope people break the game in every possible way using console commands, because like it's awesome. Let them do it. Let them data mine the crap out of it. I don't care. I would love that. It would be a great distinction if they did. So yeah. So I think cheat codes do exist in games in a sense. I think, but obviously, as you say, like cheat codes were definitely something that was monetized back in the day by like using them to sell Nintendo Power magazines and stuff like that. Absolutely, 100%.
Well, and like since cheat codes are found in the console, I think back then the reason they were input for other players because you didn't really have a console to input when you're developing your game back then, right?
Yeah.
And another thing is, I think certain cheat codes, like the famous Konami code, just become like a thing that stick forever. I think they still include that in their games even today. Maybe not every single one, but like I think their code is so popular that even games outside of Konami will even sometimes throw those in there.
Yeah, exactly.
And another reason cheat codes were useful back then is you couldn't save your game.
No.
So if you want to skip a level.
Which is also a huge deal, obviously. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I remember there's a game I specifically played called Zombies Ate My Neighbors. And on the Super Nintendo, you unlocked level codes once you beat certain levels.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could just return to that level if you died or something like that.
Yeah.
Was SKALD always a dark fantasy?
Yes, it was. It was always conceived kind of as the style of game that it is today, because it very much mirrors my preferences, like in tabletop role-playing games and the campaigns. Because SKALD is very much based on sort of my experiences as a having spent decades as sort of a tabletop RPG game master for different groups and different styles, and I would always run my own settings, and I think those were always thematically very similar to SKALD, to the setting that like SKALD is set in. So I think it was always going to be that. Obviously, like I think so, because like if I wouldn't go for that, I would probably go for something like it's either that or it is something where there is very little kind of like narrative ambition in the game, where it's basically just like theme park D&D, where it's like like where everything is kind of like, oh, there's in every cave there is a goblin, in every cave there is a dragon, in every forest there is and that's completely fine as well, but it would be kind of a different style of game, I think, which would maybe be refreshing in a way to make, because the problem about doing dark fantasy is that or especially like grim dark fantasy, is that it's very easy to break kind of not the immersion necessarily, but like to break the style of the game. You have to weigh every line of text and every kind of every scene. You have to weigh it so carefully, every art asset, because if it becomes because it's like a very delicate flower that you kind of have to tend to. Because it becomes too silly or too immersion breaking or too generic, or if it becomes too on brand with other existing dark fantasy settings, whereas like if it becomes too similar to, for instance, some of the Games Workshop settings like Warhammer 40,000, it becomes too gothic, for instance, then it's no longer SKALD. So there is like a huge responsibility, and probably one of the things that have made this game take a lot longer than expected is that you have to be really, really careful with everything you put into it, or else it becomes very generic fantasy. And I think like one of the things that SKALD does successfully, I hope, and that is also something we hear from the feedback we're getting, is that the game has it is very distinctly itself, but it's hard to put a finger on what exactly that means. You know it when you see it, but it's difficult to explain exactly what that is, and that is sort of very, very delicate, but also very attractive to me as sort of a writer and a developer.
What would you say? What would you say stands out like from SKALD? Like what? Like is there a certain thing that you would say? Like is it the narrative? Is it the powerful narrative? Do you think that makes SKALD stand out from other, like darker RPGs, or what would you? Or maybe it's your dedication to the constraints you've placed yourself into with the pixel art and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's also definitely a thing, but I also think that like there is sort of a unity of design where, since everything is basically made by me or very closely commissioned by me, such as the art assets, which are also like I watch them like the hawk when I commission them to kind of make sure everything is perfect. And I think that means that like my vision, whatever that is very sort of densely seeping through in this game. It's very this game is very much sort of conveying something I have inside, which is also interesting because it's not easy for me either sometimes to explain exactly what that vision is. I could do it, like if I had to go pitch the game tomorrow, obviously I could do something, but more so than that, this kind of writing is based on like I have it's a feeling I have inside. It's like something that I like. If I let myself go and I like dream about some dark fantasy stuff, I know what I like when I see it. I don't always know before I see it, and kind of like making stuff and making it until, oh yes, this I like this, and I couldn't have predicted it before I started writing it, but like, oh yeah, this speaks to me. And then I know if it speaks to me, then it's sort of, it fits in my vision of what this setting is and what this game is. And like, I can order art assets and I can see them and they can be huge, and they are always hugely proficient. But sometimes it's just like, no, this isn't it, even though it's gorgeous. But then I see something and it's like, yes, this is exactly it. You've captured it perfectly. Just to finish my train of thought, I think the thing is that since I'm a one-man project more or less, it means that like the vision that I'm conveying is very pure. It's not being diluted through an entire team that is trying to interpret what I mean when I say I want this and I want this. So
yeah, I think that's one of the biggest pros for indie development, right? Is just being able to create your vision and have pretty good control over exactly what you want to make. And I mean, because there's always a little bit, when reality hits you and you're like, darn it, I can't do it that way, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But like what you just said about like commissioning things, you're just like, oh, it's beautiful, but it doesn't fit this. Like, and you talked about not making it too high fantasy or cheesy or something like that to break the immersion. Like, dark fantasy really does have to like fit a perfect, like it has to feel grounded and real, but it also has to be fantasy. So, but then like you can't do it too much one way or the other because like if you get too dark, like then it just becomes like a horror game, I'd feel like. And if you get too if you're too fantasy, it just turns into like high fantasy, like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And then like an even bigger challenge with that is that as a fantasy game, obviously you could go the hard route and try to design a game that is a very low magic, grim, dark fantasy game. But like on the surface, this game, once it is done, it will have like you as the player character at least will be able to play, like obviously you'll be able to play a mage, you'll be able to play a cleric. We will be fulfilling most of sort of your classic expectations coming from like D&D inspired RPGs, even though it's wrapped in a dark fantasy package. So what I'm trying to say is that this game will probably, like if this was a novel, it would probably have a lower level of magic and sort of fantastic stuff. Probably more like the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire series. But as a game, there are certain expectations we need to fulfill them, or we have to spend a lot of time sort of designing basically a fantasy RPG without magic in it, which is not something I felt ready to do. So I think like even with this game, like there are a lot of stuff where kind of we have to because we want to make it interesting. We want to have like all the different player options, like having spells, having like kind of larger than life character abilities, it does add a lot of like replayability and fun to the game. If the game was just about like becoming invalid and losing your mind from, then it would probably be a pretty sucky game. And 100% you can make that game, but that's outside of the scope of this game, because that is really too challenging.
I don't think that would be very fun to use Invalid Simulator.
No, exactly. Like, well, you lost an arm. Play the rest of the game with one arm.
But like, so how do you bring magic to a dark world like that without doing what we talked about? Because it really is a delicate balance, because especially when you get people that dig into the lore or something, they'll be like, it's like, why are so people afraid of death in this game if there's healing magic like ready to go all the time, stuff like that.
I think, without going too deep into the lore, I think like there is definitely an allegory of magic being kind of like tied to the hubris that we have as a society towards things like nuclear weapons, where it is sort of a power that we think that we control, but where we don't really understand even a fraction of it, like on a societal level. And so a bit of the setting is sort of built around this idea that it's sort of an empire that has sort of gained power by kind of projecting this ideal that they are the absolute masters of sort of magic. But then like the setting is all about how that is just sort of the ultimate expression of hubris, because they really don't understand what they are kind of trifling with, and like the implications are going to be apocalyptic for humanity as a civilization, which is, there is a lot of allegory to, like you can draw, it can be climate change, it can be nuclear weapons, it can be pretty much anything, but like I think that is like I think it's on a sort of on a world building scale, I think that is a very attractive and appealing way of approaching it. And so that kind of lends into the idea that magic is it's something that is very costly. And in the lore in the game, you'll sort of see, like if you read the short fiction we have written and stuff like that, you'll see that sort of the magic users of the game, even though they are extremely powerful, it also takes a huge toll on them, physically in particular. They become sterile, they become very, very, very fragile physically. And so the question is like, do we represent that in the game by having the magic users be not go insane, but like having the magic users become weaker and weaker physically as the game progresses? But that would be very poor. I think that would be very poorly received if we did that in the game. So I think like the solution is that from a lore perspective, the thinking is that any magic user the player can play and for the most part encounter are so early in their career that the changes happening to them are happening on a time scale which is outside of the game, so to speak. And then we make sure to kind of reference this a lot in the lore of the game, so that like the people, the players understand that this is part of sort of the contract of using magic in the world, that you can use it, but it will ruin you physically. But you will become immensely powerful, but you will also live for maybe 500 years. So like there is a time scale that is different then. It's not like you are a 23-year-old level 25 mage. That will not happen. That's outside the scope of the game. So that's basically how we try to solve it in this game. And then like it's also like it comes to a point where it's best not to just think too much about it, because there is a limit to how much we can kind of balance these things. I think like the total play experience will be what we intend it to be. Like the players will think back about this game and think about it as a low magic setting in game, but then realize that they played the entire game as a spellcaster without really having any drawbacks with doing it,
Well, I mean, it does get to a point where you really do have to. I mean, certain universes really have to separate their lore from their game, like certain things, like you talked about. Because, like, if you gave your, I mean, if you told your player, okay, you could be a mage, but your like strength and stamina and everything are going to be in the hole. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that would really be well received unless you made them like a glass cannon. I don't know if that would be really enjoyable, because I don't know if anyone wants to play like in a really like emaciated like type of like really. So
Exactly. I think that would be too narrow of an experience. But there are certain things that I take these are the things that I spend a lot of time sort of neurotically thinking about. So, for instance, healing in the game, because that's absolutely one of those things where, if you look at especially the D&D style games, like I adore games like Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, but the issue with them is that the society doesn't make sense at all, because, as you say, there is abundant resurrection magic in the game. So why are people even dying at this point in the setting?
yeah.
And the same goes for healing. And that's the advantage of not having to work with sort of an established IP. I get to sort of to pick all of the spells myself. So like magical healing, for instance, is restricted in the game. That's why we have kind of like the two-pronged system where you have vitality and wounds, meaning that like you can heal the light damage, but once you take kind of like flesh and blood chunks, then magic doesn't work as well anymore. So like and for me at least, kind of like plugging that healing, and there is no resurrection magic in the game because you can save whenever you want, so there is no need for resurrection magic. Like it doesn't need to be in a game like this. So plugging that kind of healing and resurrection hole, it solves a lot of sort of I think it solves a lot of sort of logical holes in a setting like this. So yeah, not being able to create gold magically, for instance, or like creating food and like there's a lot of sort of spells that don't make sense when you think about it.
Yeah, speaking of magic, another thing that usually doesn't fit into society properly is when you see these fantasy worlds, you know, especially when they make like sequels to the game, and you're like, okay, where's the technological advancement and whatnot? So just because they have magic doesn't mean they wouldn't build, like, continue to advance, you know, on a science level, and maybe even combine the two. Like, you'll usually see, like, so you'll see them be like, okay, we're living in the Dark Ages, and then 1,000 years pass, we're still in the Dark Ages. It's like, like, you guys have magic, you could be probably advancing your science faster than we do in real life. Like,
yeah, exactly.
This is just a little thing, but I love what you did with like your Fog of War. I just really like that, just where like everything's all just the way that you have it, like everything's black, and then you like go over here and you got the line of sight, and then it kind of slowly, like, what's the word, kind of like
sort of creep,
just kind of like disintegrate. Like, yeah, I just the way it creeps and stuff, I really like. I like it a lot.
Thank you. It's very bespoke, because the game is probably you'll say something about this in the intro, but the game is like, it is very old school, and we use 16 colors, and we have a lot of sort of self-imposed graphical constraints to the game to kind of make it seem like an authentic retro RPG, and those graphical constraints are very hard coded into the engine we use, and like we are not kind of faking it. That's actually how the game is being made, and that means that there are certain things we cannot do with the engine. For instance, we couldn't make a Fog of War layer where there is sort of transparency. Like either you show a pixel as fully black, or you show the pixel that is sort of under the Fog of War. So we couldn't have fog like fade out, or use, you know, we couldn't use, like, it's very difficult to do kind of cross fading or fading out Fog of War as you move. So instead what we had to do is to make kind of like this dynamic algorithm that basically burns away the fog in a way that looks nice and convincing. And a lot of games like this back in the day that were tile based and used Fog of War, they are kind of like, they snap to, so when you move a tile, then instantly the Fog of War will kind of realign, and that it works fine, but it is a little bit jarring, and it makes it very clear that the game is kind of like moving like clockwork. So I spent quite a bit of time working on, or not a long time, but we spent some energy like finding a good way of making the Fog of War more pretty while still being able to use exactly 16 colors with no transparent, like we either have full transparency or full color. There is no sort of half transparency is what I'm trying to say. So you can't make like Fog of War that is semi-transparent and then just like use that to fade, which is how a lot of people would probably do it to smooth the fading. So thank you for noticing, and I'm happy you liked it.
What are like the pros and cons of you like writing your whole engine and forcing these constraints? Are there times where you've wanted to be like, man, like, are there times that you've wanted to do something but you just couldn't because of the constraints you're forced into, or Or have you been happy with it and you've been working like great with it?
No, I think it's almost the other way around. That I continually keep being happy that I made my own engine because it makes modifying it so much easier. But also, it bears saying that this is like the downside to it is that this is the first kind of large scale, even though it's a tiny project, but still like first large commercial game I'm making, and this is also the first time like the engine is being made as the game is being made, which means that looking back at it now, there's obviously a lot of things I would have done differently, and I have done I have sort of rewritten a lot of the engine. So the engine is doing pretty much exactly what I wanted to do, and it could obviously always be refactored, but I have spent a lot of time like, oh no, I probably can't do that. There was a lot of that going around in the early parts of the game where I was thinking like, no, we probably can't do that, but wouldn't it be cool if, but oh no, let's just let it lie. And then it gets to a point where like maybe you have a week of vacation and you're like, and I'm the kind of guy that like I really enjoy the coding. So when I have time off, I still work on the project, but I allow myself to try out stuff that is sort of outside of the production schedule.
Yeah.
And the fog of war thing is a perfect example of that. It's something where I've been thinking like, oh wow, I don't like this snappy fog of war. Wouldn't it be cool if? And then you kind of you decide that okay, I'll give it 2 days. I'll try to see if I can make it work. And most of the time you can make it work. But obviously it would be faster if I had realized from the get-go that was the way to do Fog of War, because then I wouldn't have to first write one Fog of War system and then rewrite it again to become the one that is now. And there has been a lot of that going on in the game, and that's obviously just what you get for making your first game and maybe being a little bit too ambitious. But I think the result kind of speaks for itself, because the game has it's quite a different game now than it was 3 years ago, I would say. And I don't think like I wouldn't have been happy any other way. It has to be this way because this is my vision of the game, the way it is looking right now.
So do you have like kind of maybe like a list of things that you're gonna go refactor after you release SKALD then, and you're gonna go like change some things and improve some things for maybe your sequel that you're gonna do?
Absolutely. And I think a surprising number of those things are not things that players, for the most part, it wouldn't be hugely obvious to the players if I did it, but it has more to do with like how the tools are used to create content and how that is done as fast and as sort of as securely as possible, that it doesn't introduce bugs or semantical issues in the game. So a lot of it has to do with kind of like the tools, and then there are a lot of sort of systems and things that I would have liked to put in the game, but that I realize now it would clearly be feature creep at this point. Yeah. I could do it, but I'm not going to do it because it is outside of the scope of the game. And even if I did it, I would probably not be able to like leverage it at this point because we are so late in development. And like one of the things is that I would love to be able to do like underwater levels and have like some simple pixelated dynamic effects to kind of so that you could like go underwater and swim, stuff like that. And it's very low hanging. It's something that we like. Oh, it would take me maybe a little week to make, to sort of implement it. But as I said, like we're at the point in development now where there isn't even a week to spare. So, and then we would also have to create content to kind of justify it, and then we would have to do more testing to make sure, even though we have implemented it. And so the ball keeps rolling, and then that's one of those things where I'm thinking that it would be really nice to have in the next game at least.
I'll look for the secret water level behind the waterfall.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I feel like that's one of those things that you might like. If you had the time, you'd sneak and you're like, oh man, I really want to get it. Because it sounds like you kind of like really are interested in getting it in. I know you said it would be like feature creep, but it sounds like something you're actually interested in a lot.
I think the problem is at this point is that the game doesn't need it, and there's a lot of other things that the game needs. And so, and then obviously I would say to my publisher, well, we can add it post-launch. But then I know that Tina, who is my amazing producer, would say that yeah, but
But
If you are
why?
already, wouldn't you instead save it for the second game? That sounds like a great selling point for the next game, which is 100% correct.
Sounds like. So what? Do you have any Easter eggs in the game?
I don't think we like at this point we don't really have a lot of Easter eggs. There is one Easter egg in the demo which is very explicitly an Easter egg, which is the Santa Fury quest where you look for the missing ship. And the Santa Fury quest, basically the Santa Fury is like this missing ship that you're looking for, so it's kind of a treasure hunt. But like the Easter egg is that my publisher is named Raw Fury, and they have like the Santa Fury is basically a Santa character that they have, and like when we have Rawcember, which is like their December event, all of the games do kind of like Santa Fury themed Easter eggs in their games, but to kind of not do like the whole fourth wall breaking thing, the Santa Fury is instead the name of a ship in my game because it sounds similar enough to like the Santa Maria or the Santa Ana or something like that. So that is actually an Easter egg, but beyond that I'm very careful about it because I really don't want like fourth wall breaking things in the game. It's almost pretty much a hard no. Like some games do have a lot of fourth wall breaking stuff, like Fallout. The old like Fallout 1, Fallout 2 would have a lot of sort of fourth wall breaking.
Well, it's kind of comical. It's kind of a comical game, even though it's supposed to be dark.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely it is. And I kind of don't want that. I want the humor in the game to be sort of diegetic. I want it to the humor exists in the context of the game. It is not sort of meta humor about the game. So it does sound a little bit like it sometimes it feels a little bit like pretentious to say it, but I think it would break with the setting too much. So
no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I just thought it would be funny because I just pictured like since you couldn't get your water level in the first game, like if you walked up to a pond or something and you're like, I should go for a swim sometime or something, and then the next game you finally get to go for a swim or something.
and that is absolutely something we could do in the game. It doesn't really break the fourth wall. Because it could potentially mean something in the context of the game world as well. But yeah, absolutely.
Of course, right off the beginning of the demo, you do get plunged into the water, so it's probably it's
time in water in the demo. You do spend a lot of time in water, so but we didn't make the water level.
When you were doing the combat, has the combat always been the way it's been, or did you ever have any other plans regarding the combat?
Well, that's also one of the things that changed kind of drastically at some point in development, where combat was more like Final Fantasy-like, where it was based on sort of fixed positions on a map, and you would, instead of doing like it didn't have like a spatial aspect in the same game, in the same sense, and that was because one of the inspirations for the game when I started it was like Wasteland 1 actually, and Wasteland. So a lot of people think that was kind of like a JRPG style combat, but that wasn't really my inspiration. My inspiration was like the Bard's Tale and Wasteland games, where combat is not positional, but you have like this, you issue orders to each character and then you kind of execute, and then it loops through your party and execute each order you've given them. But it's very menu based, and just for like technical constraints when I started the game, and now we're talking like the very, very start of the game. Like I didn't feel confident that we would be able to pull off like grid-based combat in the way we have now. But it's also one of those things where the moment I changed it, I immediately thought to myself that why didn't I do this from?
Yeah, it's great combat. I love it.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it, and like it's still very rough in the demo in the sense that it is very bare bones. There's not really a lot of like interactivity between special abilities and stuff like that. It's basically you just move and punch. that's all you do at this point, which is just because we haven't added like all of the class features. You can't play as a spellcaster in the demo. Once that goes into the game, the combat sort of your options in the combat will increase a lot, and one of the core design pillars of combat, even from back in the day when it was non-positional, which is still important for me, is that I want kind of like this combinatorics of these interactions of abilities and sort of positioning to play to play into each other. I'm a very big fan of card games like Magic the Gathering myself, and I like the way that like the game is sort of, there is no randomness to it beyond drawing cards, but once you have the cards in your hand, like there is no randomness. What you play is what's going to happen, but the difficulty comes from kind of trying to predict how it will interact with everything on the board. And that is sort of a little bit of what I want with the combat in this game as well. I want it to be like an interesting choice for you as a player to, do you do this or do you do that? And then you should be able to kind of resonate about what's going on the board and sort of, and sort of think about what is the optimal solution for this, and then sort of.
Did you ever, did Card Battler ever cross your mind?
No. I don't like. I really enjoy a lot of those games because, as I said, I enjoy Magic the Gathering, but SKALD is an homage. It's a very clearly an homage to a certain style of game, and the card battling aspect would be so outside of the.
Yeah, that's more of like a modern take on video games, right?
100% it is. 100% it is. So there isn't any room for it.
Do you plan to expand on that, and like if you do make a sequel, do you plan to kind of lift those constraints, or do you plan to still kind of do that same like paying respects to the retro style games?
No, I don't think. I think definitely SKALD 2 will be very similar to SKALD 1 in the way it will be a refinement of the game, but it won't be sort of a re-envisioning of the game. So at least unless something changes, as long as like the games are SKALD : something, so SKALD 1, SKALD 2, SKALD 3, they will be fairly similar. And I think that if we change something, it might be that we, for instance, for the next game, we probably won't use the same color palette. We will still use a restricted palette, but I could definitely see us using a palette with like maybe 24 colors and a handcrafted palette, like, because we are now currently sort of more or less emulating the Commodore 64 color palette, which is an interesting color palette, but it's not like, it's obviously not optimally designed to make a fantasy role-playing game, and there's a lot of interesting design space in making a color palette ourselves that is 100% optimized to what we are trying to do. And that also means that we would be redoing all of the graphical assets and stuff like that. But I'm not interested in exactly this series to kind of innovate too much. But that being said, the engine that we use to make this game is, since I control it completely and have written it myself, we can make it do anything. It would be very little work to sort of replace the top-down view with sort of like a pixelated first-person view, for instance, where you do like a dungeon crawler, like a blobber dungeon crawler, where you move like something like that, or even, as you said, like make it a card battler. So it's more a question of like, how do we position the different products next to each other so that we are like we don't have products that are too similar. So potentially we could make like a science fiction roguelike card battler using the same engine with very little modification. So
yeah, I guess especially when you're establishing, like, you know, SKALD becomes really successful and you haven't established like this is what this game is, it wouldn't be too wise to, you know, completely switch your audience's expectations by innovating too much or any of these things, because then people are going to go into it and be like, this isn't what I like. What I was expecting SKALD. This isn't SKALD. This is. I think the dungeon crawling can be like a fun side thing. Maybe not in your game specifically, but I know like Oliver Joyce put that in his Swords and Sandals. I like the music. Who's the composer?
The composer is a Ukrainian musician called Surter. So SURT_R. And he has been with the project since almost day one, actually, as a sort of freelance composer, and he has done absolutely every piece of music. And the interesting thing is that we are kind of like he's been with the project so long that like we are putting we updated the demo last week, and that includes sort of an updated music track, because we felt that the old music had kind of like, the game has developed so much graphically or been refined so much graphically that there was time to do the same thing with the music. So even though it's the same compositions and several new ones, we've kind of made them a little bit like richer in a sense. So it's been a fantastic ride to have him, and I think like one of the selling points of the games is absolutely that the music is it's very distinct. It could so easily have been generic fantasy music, and I think like this moody synthy like 80s almost Blade Runner-esque style music we have for a lot of the game is it's definitely a selling point to a lot of people, and we get a lot of excellent feedback regarding the music, and that is because Surt is insanely talented. He is my deranged genius, as I tell him.
You need a deranged genius when you're making a dark Lovecraftian type game. So when he's composing, do you say, "Hey, I want kind of this feeling to be conveyed in these scenes or in this area," or do you kind of just throw him some art and some what's going on in the script, and he's just like, "Okay, I can feel what this is," or
a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, because he's like Surt is also a game developer himself, so he has a very good feeling for what would work in a given area. So sometimes like he could have obviously produced the entire soundtrack without much feedback from me, but in the areas or like when there is cause for me to give art direction on the music, I do so because like we find that the pieces who are like that are made specifically for a certain area or situation, they usually work. They are the most impactful ones, simply because it reinforces sort of the tone of the area or the scene or the encounter so well. And that's probably one of the things that I think he's so good at, is that he can very quickly sort of take both my sort of asset order and also my feedback to his initial sketches and turn it around to something actionable, which is a hugely helpful skill for him to have. He's very fast to work, but we do for the most part we try to have like at least some direction where it's like something like this piece, for instance, like when you enter the villa area, when you talk to like the lord of the manor, there is a piece playing that is very inspired by a track called Sarabande, which is like a classic music piece that was used in a Stanley Kubrick movie called Barry Lyndon, for instance. And that was like so for instance, in that case we very clearly reference it, and I said like, this is what I want. And he listened to it and he made his own sort of interpretation of that. And in other areas it's more like, we need this music to be more fascist because there is like we have the empire is doing something here.
What sound is fascist? Like what sound when you say, is it like almost like an imperial type sounding, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. Marches, like military marches. Those are pretty fascist. So stuff like that.
No, I love that. There's actually sounds to like words like that, right? With the prologue, with the prologue music, like, can you give me an example of like what your input was, and like maybe the what you were trying to portray for, like, for example, I keep going back to this one just because it's a memorable one, but like you fall in the water, right? You have the beautiful art of like your characters submerged underneath water, the ship's being destroyed. What kind of emotion or thought process were you trying to like portray, like the characters feeling or thinking, or
I think the music that we play when you fall in the water wasn't actually written explicitly for that, but it was written sort of as an ambient piece, which is supposed to be like ambient and slightly unsettling, like you're walking around and waiting to uncover some kind of dark secret. I think that was like one of those very loose directions where because some pieces are very explicitly ambient, where you just want them to kind of be in the background and like convey something, and that's one of those pieces. Just to take our process, like probably my order was something like that, and then he returns with something, and then I usually like do something where this is good, but we need like the beginning needs to be softer, or like the intro is too long. It starts too soft. We needed to establish like a motif earlier, because that's also one of those things. Like certain areas have like musical motifs, and if that's the case, you often should like establish them early, so that you associate that motif with that area, and like there's a lot of stuff like that going on. But those pieces are like very ambient pieces that don't really have a motif. They're just like,
well, I know it's ambient, but I feel like once you put it in that scene, you're forced to focus on the sound music, because like if you're just walking around normally, you may not be focusing on the ambient music as much, but as soon as you plunge your character into that scene, you're kind of forced to take in the art of what's going on. But then you really start to focus on the soundtrack as well, because there's nothing else on your screen. There's literally just the art and the sound, and those are the two things you can digest in that moment. So it's almost like it takes a, like when you have those two things together, it's almost like that ambient piece slightly like becomes something else, if that makes sense. Like it.
And I think the reason for that is that the preceding, and that is sort of a very explicit choice, but that like, or a very specific choice. But the preceding scene has a very high energy music, because it is kind of like a high energy situation.
Yeah.
And then there is a contrast once it flips and you go in the water, and obviously there is no sound underwater. And there is also like this almost like a dreamlike quality to the next scene, like the villa area. It's a flashback. There's like this almost a little bit of surrealist thing going on, and so the change in music is very deliberate in that sense.
Yeah, it makes it feel more like you're like, you don't even know, like, is this actually happening type of feeling. Like,
yeah, exactly.
If we have other starting developers watching this, how important is marketing, and like where do you think they should start if they have like no idea what they should be doing for selling their game?
Marketing is hugely important, because it is extremely important to remember that there are so many good games coming out. Not even like a lot of bad games, but good games. There are more good games coming out than most people can digest. So we live in an age where it's almost like getting access to the tools and the distribution platform for your game is trivial at this point. And obviously you have to make a good game, but unfortunately there are a lot of smart people making games. So even just making a good game is not enough to succeed. And it is extremely important to remember this as a young developer. You are owed nothing. You will get nothing for free in this industry, no matter how good you are. So you literally have to be smart on every level, and also a little bit lucky.
It's incredibly competitive, right? You have to,
it is
like, you have to beat each level of people, right? Because there's the people that want to make a game, then there's the people that actually start working on the game, then there's the people that actually release their game, and then those are the people you have to compete with. I mean, there's a lot of incredibly good games out there.
Yeah, exactly. And of those people who release their games, there are those who do marketing correct, and there are those who don't do marketing correct. And it is a lot more likely that the people who do their marketing correctly will sell more games than you, and that is the sad truth. And just to be clear, also, I don't like to think about like the game scene as competitive, because I don't really experience it as competitive. Game developers are usually hugely helpful and fantastic people, but it is competitive in the sense that there is only like a limited amount of attention go around. It's not even that there is a limit to the number of players to go around, because there are almost an unlimited number of players, but like drawing people, having people look at this video of you and me talking about SKALD means that they're not looking at another video of someone talking about another game. That's just how it goes. So all that being said, I think like marketing is hugely important, but there are like two styles of marketing, and I think like one is sort of the slow burn kind of like I'm not going to call it low effort, but like long-term slow burn marketing. And then there is like this thunderclap marketing, where it's like buy it now, like this
Yeah.
call to action marketing. And those two things are different, and you need to handle them differently, and sort of look at your game and its development cycle and its post-launch life cycle, and think about like how is the slow burn marketing going to work, and how is like the sort of the high energy part of the marketing going to work. There's probably terms for this. I don't know what they are. I'm not a marketing person, but just talking of my experience. And I think like for indie developers at least, the slow burn marketing is really important, but that should probably be doing stuff like establishing a social media presence is hugely important, kind of building a community that is interested in your game and talking about your game. It can mean different things for a lot of people. We have actively used Discord. We have a pretty big Discord that has been live for probably 4 or 5 years, which has been hugely important. And that is obviously because this is the type of game that is very easy for people to flock around, because a lot of people are passionate about role-playing games and classic games. So for us, like having a Discord or a forum or something like that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't have to be it for every game, but for me, it works. I use Twitter quite extensively simply because I enjoy it as a platform, and I have some proficiency with it because I've been using it for a long time. So I've basically been sharing like pictures and dev updates on Twitter since day one, using that to build a community, and then kind of using that to sort of funnel people into a Discord, and had a very sort of like active community where I have had sort of a hands-on approach to it, and been very forthcoming with interacting with the community. And that's kind of like been the slow burn marketing. But then there is sort of like the more high energy marketing, which is going on now, sort of in the time more or less directly preceding launch. And this is also like a timing thing where you have to give a lot of thought to when do we start marketing, because you don't want to spend all your energy promoting the game and then have so long between the marketing and the launch of the game that people forget the game.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of like technicality to this, and for me, thankfully, this is one of the huge advantages of having a publisher, because they, first of all, spend a lot of money on this, and they have a lot of very, very skilled and talented people who are dedicated, like doing this type of thing. So and I think like for a lot of indie games, you won't be able to do this kind of like high energy marketing for your game. You might have some budget to throw away at like doing some sort of paid promotions and stuff like that, but this is very time consuming, and it's very easy to just throw money out the window. So I think that for like a new upcoming indie or a game developer, I think like probably the biggest takeaway is to do the guerrilla marketing thing, the slow burn thing, the low effort thing. Put yourself out there, talk to people, make people talk about your product. That's maybe even the biggest takeaway for me. Do stuff in a way that makes your product and your project conversational, that makes people want to discuss it, want to talk about it. That is probably like the best way to raise interest for your game. And if there are design decisions you can do in your game that makes people want to talk about the game, that's fantastic. Like, is there a way for you to cultivate like a meta game for your game? Have people, and that's the beauty about doing RPGs, because people can discuss character builds, combat strategies. They can talk about like, oh, where do you find this secret in the game? Hey, have you heard that there is another secret in this level? It's so easy to, like, this is the things that will fill forums of posts, which is hugely important. And you should also think about stuff like how streamable is this game? Is this something where people would stream the game and other people would watch? Is it something where people would make let's play videos of it? Like, all of these things are really, really important. And for me, that's actually like a lot of the reasons for a lot of the changes we have made to the game, which are also hugely helpful for the player experience. But I always ask myself the question, like, will this make the game more likely to be played on YouTube, for instance? Because having people play the game on YouTube and talk about it, content creators engaging with your game, is just, it's literally free money. Like, it is hugely impactful and and really important. So even though SKALD will obviously never be like, it will never be League of Legends or whatever kids are playing these days. But I'm always trying to say, working with what I have, what can I do to still make it a little bit more entertaining to watch someone play this game, for instance. So I think those are things you should be thinking about as an indie developer, because it ties into kind of like the low effort guerrilla marketing, sort of slow burning thing.
What do you suggest for someone that has the wacky idea of approaching a publisher? Like what do they kind of need to be prepared for? Do they just need like an elevator pitch and a dream, or do they need like a entire game design document written out and that elevator pitch, or what do you think?
Well, I think the first thing to realize when you are approaching a publisher is that you are basically asking someone to invest money in you as a person and your project. People are always investing first in the person and then in the project. So if you as a person make a poor impression, it doesn't matter how good your project is, especially if you're a young, unproven developer. You have to make a good first impression, and then you also need to have a kick-ass project. And you have to remember that you are asking people to put a lot of faith in you if you have just an elevator pitch for a game, nothing to back it up, like no resume, no previous projects, you don't have a demo.
Like, I don't think anyone would want to invest in just a pitch and nothing behind it.
Absolutely not. And even a good game design document are like a dime a dozen. I think what helps hugely, and basically what managed to get me the deal that I have with Raw Fury, which is a fantastic deal, something I think most people would only dream of. I think the reason for that is that I approached Raw Fury with a playable and quite extensive demo of the game, because what sinks most collaborations between publishers and developers obviously is that the developer is unable to complete the project. And if you have a well-rounded demo, it's not only sort of a great display case of what the game could and is going to be, but it also proves to them that you have, like, if you have been able to take it to the level of the demo, you're pretty far along in development.
Yeah.
And I think that increases your chance of being picked up by a publisher exponentially. But then there is also the kind of like the more difficult assessment where I didn't spend a long time looking for a publisher, but I did enter into conversations with a few. I shopped around a little bit before I landed with Raw Fury, and I was approached by quite a few publishers in that period where it was sort of publicly known that I was talking to publishers. And I would just say that I don't think that there are anyone working in the publishing industry with bad intentions, but there are a lot of publishers who will sort of give you enough rope to hang yourself with. There is a risk that they underfund the project and undersupport it. Then you have also entered into some contractual obligations that can be difficult for you to come out of, because you get greedy and someone waves money under your nose and you think that, oh wow, I can't turn this down.
Yeah, right.
Oh, but then it's not enough money for you to kind of to complete the project the way you want it to be. And it's also, but still you have also entered into some kind of contract that it is not trivial to get out of anymore. So I think that you should really give a lot of thought to like, what do you actually need, what could you actually accept, and also spend a lot of time researching the actual publishers you are in discussions with. Look at their game lineup, look at their other catalogs, talk to people they have already signed and work with, check all of their social media. Like, you have to do a lot of due diligence, and for me that's like Raw Fury is one of maybe two publishers that I approached, that I went to and talked to. And the reason I went with Raw Fury, and the reason that they were my first choice, is that they had a very high sort of ethical profile. They had a very good, they had a very they had a game lineup where I could sort of see the lineup, like their catalog, and I could like see my game in it. Whereas other publishers, it's like they have a lineup and it's like, oh, my game doesn't fit here for one reason or the other. And those things are extremely important, because it is not the case that if you signed with a publisher, then you will be happy for the rest of your life. In some cases, it still takes a lot of work, and there is a lot of sort of, it is. It's not like an employment situation, but it is not dissimilar to that. There is a lot of sort of responsibility and demands, in that sort of give and take in that situation, in that relationship. So it should not be entered into lightly, I think.
Should we expect SKALD to branch out from PC to other platforms at all? Like, would we be able to see like Xbox SKALD or?
Yeah, potentially, but there is always it takes a little bit of work to do porting, always, not just like with SKALD, but with any game, and it quickly becomes the question. Like, and also because I'm not a studio, I'm a solo developer, and even if Raw Fury, because like if we wanted to do porting, Raw Fury would offer to outsource it, but even if we outsourced it, I would still need to engage with it. I couldn't like outsource it 100%. So it becomes a question of numbers.
So like if it does well on PC, basically.
Yeah, and then the question becomes like, can the sales numbers we could expect on another platform, can they defend postponing making the next game by potentially half a year or something like that? So that becomes
it's like, is the audience even there, right? Like if it, because you have a very specific RPG, I'd imagine there's not going to be as big of an audience on like, Xbox or PlayStation versus PC.
I think we can absolutely say that the core audience is likely on PC. And but then I think that a lot of people could, like, I can definitely see someone playing this on the Switch, for instance. Like, I would enjoy playing this game myself on a Switch. Yeah. Simply, like, especially like with a not a mounted Switch, but like playing it like this on a Switch.
Yeah, that's where it would be really good. I think just like on a.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would work absolutely. And Xbox, I have no idea. I'm not really a console player myself, so it's difficult for me to gauge that. But I think PC is our core audience, definitely, and it will take a lot for me at least to trade spending time making more content for PC to push it to console. It would have to be something we would outsource, and to do that, it would have to be worth it.
What is a tip or philosophy that really helped you in game dev or life in general?
I think it's like, especially for this, I think it's always been like don't be afraid to kind of find the niche and dig deep in that niche. I think is really important, because it's so easy to. I think for most people it is not a path to success to try and do something everyone else is doing, because then you will be a very small fish, a big pond, and it becomes almost impossible to succeed. And I don't mean success as in like becoming rich or something like that, but just like being able to have. I think it can be a lot more rewarding for a lot of people to find something niche and nerdy and like do it because you love it. Don't do it because it's what everyone else is doing, or it's because
if you love it and it does well. Success means different things to different people. So if you're just happy with the product, that's success right there.
Absolutely, and I think that for a lot of creative stuff, or for all creative stuff, I think like passion is the big game changer. It's not possible to do a project like this without having a lot of passion, and that usually for a lot of people means like digging deep into something that is very specific, and kind of just like going deep on that. And that's always sort of been the philosophy behind making SKALD. It is to sort of like do something that I really want to. I'm making a game that I really want to play and that I enjoy playing myself, and just like digging as deep as humanly possible on that. And it's worked for me so far, and I think it would work for other people as well. But you have to kind of be true to yourself. Like, it takes a lot of like introspection, thinking about why am I doing this decision? Is this like this design decision? Is this is this on target for what I'm aiming for, or am I simply doing it because it's expected of me, or like, yeah. So
Cool. Great answer there. So, but yeah, thank you very much for talking to me today, Anders. I appreciate it a lot.
not at all, Dane. Thank you so much.